guest is originally from Eastern Europe. She moved to the US at the age of 20 and spent over a decade working in the performing arts in New York City. During the lockdowns, she moved out of the city and now lives on the road, traveling the US in a school bus converted into a camper and writing for travel blogs and magazines. Her travels inspired her to write fantasy stories and delve deep into self-knowledge, personal growth techniques, and ways to develop intuition. To share her knowledge, she offers tarot readings and leads online game sessions that helps players get clarity on their lives' paths. Let's welcome today's guest, my friend, Irina Abraham. Welcome, Irina.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's what's interesting is first off your ability to persevere and to move on and reinvent yourself, not only as an actress, but to actually find a path to actually live on the road in a camper, and then to develop these esoteric skills that people can actually use, or techniques to develop, as I just mentioned, intuition. I guess early on in your travels coming to the U.S., I guess your intention was an acting career, so to speak.
No.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't. It wasn't. It's interesting about acting and also about me studying in the US. You know how they say write down your wishes? So I don't know if there is something especially powerful about writing things down when you're a teenager, but I found a book one day, and I think I was maybe about 17, and I wrote down several things in that book. And one of them was to study abroad. The other one was to act, to play leading roles in feature films, right? And there was something else, to travel around the world. So, and then all of it happened. And I have to admit that some of it, like acting, almost felt like it happened by some kind of magic, and it wasn't really something that I really wanted to do, or that even was truly my path. I don't know if that makes sense. So at some point I would tell my husband, I'm kind of scared to find out what else I wrote down, because if it comes true, but really, yeah, I came to the US by happenstance. My school back in Belarus, which is between Poland and Russia, was shut down for political reasons, and I was among a few lucky students who got a scholarship to study in the US. And then I went to theater school simply because I needed to extend my visa somehow, and it was the only school that I could afford. Yeah, wow. And I was interested in directing, and then I somehow veered into acting because one thing went under after another, and then feature film, just like I wrote down,
Yeah. Yeah, you have. I mean, the people underestimate the power of manifestation in terms of being open and in the moment, and being connected to, I guess, the the power of imagination, of creating a future by just being in the present moment. And I think, I guess your particular experience of what you just mentioned lends to that. But you've also had other types of other challenges in terms of working in the acting career and moving up that path. Maybe you can give the audience a little bit of a background of what you did and what it's like to be in that industry.
In the acting, yeah, I think I always had a bit of an inner resistance to being an actor, and you know how they say we have a bunch of negative programming in our heads, like none of it is maybe real, but I was imagining actors being these people who are egocentric and obsessed with fame, and I didn't want to have any part of that. I didn't want to do that. I thought it was too egocentric to even want to be an actor. So in a way, I think, a little dishonest with myself, because I was an actor for many years, but all the time I would tell myself, well, it's just something, something I do. It just so happened that I do it, but I'm not really 100%. So it took me even a while to admit to myself, no, that's what what I'm doing. That's what I like.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is definitely a lot of ego in that industry, and I think it's imposed on us from the outside by the celebrity culture, because to be an actor, most people imagine a celebrity right away, but 99.99% of actors are not celebrities, and they're still actors. They have jobs in small regional theaters, on Broadway, at the opera. I worked at the Metropolitan Opera for many years. They do background work, and then they do small theater gigs, and independent films, and they teach. So I think to really understand, for those who want to go into acting, they need to understand what it actually means to be an actor, which has nothing to do with being a celebrity for most of us. So if you're cool, not ever being a celebrity and still being an actor, so definitely go do it. But if you only want to be an actor because you associate it with this kind of glamorous lifestyle, then maybe it's something to rethink.
Yeah. In terms of going up that road of the acting career, so to speak, um, I would say, from my perspective as an outsider looking in, that a person's ego gets bounced around from many different places, and I think the adversity and the ability, as I mentioned earlier about your personality, the ability to move forward and keep going and being resilient is one of the traits that would help somebody in the acting world. In other words, there's probably a lot more rejections than there are accolades in that career.
Yeah, and knowing, I guess, resilience means knowing your worth and understanding that it's not dependent on the outside recognition
Right.
and success. And I would say that's the most difficult part. And probably people who happen to be actors here in this, incarnation, that's something that they have to deal with the most, is to understand, okay, how can I still really feel, not just know intellectually, but feel my inner worth, even though the world very often tells me that it's not there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what was the great shift from this career to what you're doing now?
Okay, so the shift was a little bit metaphysical. I'll be completely honest with you. Uh, I moved into the bus. We moved with my family, my husband and our son, who is now 15. And I thought I could still be doing this. So I was still auditioning. At the time, the industry shifted to self-tapes. So I thought, this is perfect. I can still audition. I can then, take a flight if I have a project. And then I was taking courses with this lady. She's Russian speaking, so my native language is Russian. She's Russian speaking, and she's one of those, self-help people who developed her own technique on kind of self-knowledge and understanding who you are and how you can create your life, which is a very popular theme today. So she has a set of very unusual tools. I honestly have never seen these particular tools anywhere, and I have, navigated that world. I like these things. I've read books, and I also speak French, and the French are really big on all of that stuff as well. So this lady is pretty unique, I think. One of her exercises she had something to do with kind of a creation of this inner self that you were able to see with your inner vision. And then you show that inner self different options of future, and you watch how that self reacts to that future. And going with the reaction, pretty much what you're meant to learn is whether you are truly on your soul's path. Okay, so she really propagates the idea that we're all able to connect to the intuition, and we're all able to know everything, and even go as far as really see our own future or the multitude of possibilities of the future. So this is one of the tools she uses. And when I was showing my, you can say that reflection of or echo of the soul, my possible futures that I was dreaming about that had to do with acting, that little figurine was not reacting very well to them. And I was like, oh, I thought you'd be happy. What's happening? So that was the first clue. And then I started having not serious health issues, but just like some little cues pointing to that there is some kind of tension, that something needs to be let go of. And slowly I came to the idea that a dream of being an actor somehow was more of a pretty picture that I picked up somewhere else and decided that it was mine,
Right,
you know,
right.
but it really wasn't. And I think it happens to a lot of us. We sometimes pick up something from the world that we think looks really cool. And from what I hear, it's possible to make something that's not technically yours. It's possible to make it yours if you really fall in love with it and really just give it your all. So it's possible to
Yeah,
change,
yeah.
you're here to create. And I think people are saying today more than ever, the paths are not so set anymore. It's really very fluid and things can change. And even something your soul has set for you as a milestone might not even happen because you're changing things in the moment and you're creating. So it's very active right now. So, I'm not saying that, don't go for it. You can still go for it. But my choice was at the time that I felt wasn't right anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back around to it, but yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's how.
interesting. Well, since I do I do Akashic record readings, and actually do what is known as a soul print. Look at the person's fingerprints, and actually, as you just mentioned, a lot of times when we choose professions, we choose sometimes professions that are handed down to us through ancestral patterns, through the fantasy of what would give us the most, glamour, so to speak, or rise above maybe some of the suffering that our ancestors have gone through in terms of finding an accolade or advancing ourselves. And from my perspective, as you just mentioned, I think the soul itself, the soul's purpose is much different than our outer profession that we choose to earn money or to survive, or motivates us to, as you just mentioned again before. So from the Akashic records, we have in our soul's path, we wind up realizing that we have to satisfy the soul, and what our soul is not what appears on the outside of ourselves. It's
Yeah.
interesting from your perspective, what it is steps of actually aligning to the soul's purpose. Is it what your eye, sometimes they show people's eyes dilate in like a picture. That means that they had that hit a chord for them. Obviously, that's not the case
Yeah.
with your thing.
Well, that's interesting. Actually, I wanted to ask you a question. I heard somewhere that the soul's purpose and what we do in life are almost like two different things. So somebody, I forget who it was, but they said, your soul's purpose is something about the people you meet and what you do, what kind of light you bring into this life. But what you do while you are at it really doesn't matter. You could be a doctor, a plumber, a librarian, an actor. It really doesn't matter so much because the purpose is something else and everything else kind of happens along that. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and it's a difficult question to answer insofar as understanding what I've learned is the fact that um, we experience certain setbacks in our life, and we go through certain trauma that will put us on the path of our soul's purpose, so to speak. So, in other words, we in terms of fingerprints, let's put it that way. There are different schools that each person belongs to: the school of love, school of wisdom, school of peace, and school of service. In those particular schools, we're going to experience certain things, like, let's say, if a person's in the school of service, or in a person has these types of patterns, they're going to experience consistent health issues. They're going to experience certain setbacks where they're the victim of circumstances, where people take advantage of them for advice, for service, and they keep saying, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm being taken advantage of. But when the person overcomes the hurdle through these people who create this adversity, and they take ownership for their service and not look at it as an ego state where they have to gain something from it or lose something from it, then they come over the hill, and they realize that it's free sailing because now they're of service. They're comfortable with themselves, so they become a teacher, they become a healer, they become a tarot card reader. They look to help. They look to help other people on the path of service. And just one more example: school of love. A person doesn't feel emotions. They're in relationships where they meet people who don't show them emotion, so they feel that they're not getting love from anyone. In fact, it's the person who chooses these people on a soul level so that they are the impetus for their own personal love, self-love.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think those particular schools, when we find professions that put us towards our soul's purpose, which is creating first difficulty and then more peace. So
Mm.
I think that is, since you asked me, that's more of the soul in activation, along with what makes us smile, not what gives us the most money, what really makes us smile. And most of the time, it's, I think they say, it's the childlike feeling that you get from something you think about.
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's basically in terms of the soul itself. You also, as you're on your journey and doing what you're doing, as you just mentioned, being aware of your soul, you also are writing and writing travel blogs and documenting your travels. Maybe you could share with the audience what travel does for you and what it feels like, because a lot of people are afraid to leave their house to travel and go on vacation. They like to have four walls that they're very comforted by. They like to have their lawn cut every once a week. And here you are with your husband and your son out traveling and exploring. And it's so admirable to see that. So share a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, so we started because honestly, when the lockdowns happened, we both lost our jobs. Tim and me, everything I was doing was in the acting industry at the time. So everything was, everything stopped. And at the time, we didn't want to commit to another year of our rent in Jersey City and having to go back into the grind and try to find similar jobs and just try to make it. We could have done that, but we really didn't want to. So we gave up our apartment, and what we had at the time was this bus. It was this old short school bus that we got just to do things, on the weekends and do short trips, because my husband was obsessed with van life. And at the time, it was such a hip thing, and he was following all these YouTubers, and it looked so cool. But then we thought, wow, well, we actually don't really have a place to live. And the only thing we do own is this bus. So we had this idea to find a tiny house somewhere on a piece of land where we can park our bus and live right next to it and work on it. And so imagine that was just the idea, right, that we had. And literally, I go online and I swear almost immediately, I find a tiny house for rent. But check this out. The people who built and who were renting the tiny house out were also people who were doing tiny living, who were starting a tiny living company. So they knew all about it. That's exactly what they were doing. So we winded up living on their land in the tiny house that they built and eventually hiring them to help us build everything in the bus that would have probably taken us very long without their help. But that was like it was meant to be. It just one thing went to another. And then we moved after 9 months of building, we moved into the bus and left. And what it has been is, when people think of going to live like this on the road, they think of like different scary things, like, oh, like there's going to be mean people, or you're not going to be able to park anywhere. The police is going to come and the police are going to kick you out, and you won't be able to find water, because we have to fill up on water, obviously, and like all of these things. And honestly, Adam, none of it is true in Van. Like that is not what you are going to be concerned with on the road. People are kind. You're going to meet so many wonderful people who are helpful. They let you park in their backyard. They let you have their water. They invite you in. They have questions. They're all happy to, find out more about your lifestyle. It's really beautiful. What happens is that you have this degree of freedom that is completely unprecedented, that it makes it a little hard to stop living this way.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you are constantly on the move. Your backyard is always changing. You're constantly meeting other people. And there is always this thing of, you don't have to let your roots grow and be put and I don't know, maybe in some ways face yourself in some
Yeah, yeah,
ways.
I understand that.
Want to say it's an escape, but for my husband, he found an amazing thing. He's painting, he's a muralist, so he offers his services to businesses, and literally we would just drive. Like right now, we're in this beautiful vineyard in California,
Wow,
and
wow.
he's going to be painting a mural here. And so he really found something like that. For me, it is more of a search. It's more of a when I start to think, okay, maybe I need to be put somewhere to start doing something, not just online. But at the same time, it's a little scary because I've been,
Yes,
like
yes.
the wind for so long. So yeah.
What's interesting is in relationships as well, where one person you think has the stable foundation of a job or that will be the career, and then somewhere along the line, as you growing on a path together, it shifts to the other person taking the lead, so to speak, in terms of finding a profession that actually is supportive and great. And maybe we'll share Tim's work and his website at the bottom in the description, because
Sure.
I think that'll be nice. And his artwork is terrific and beautiful. Um,
Thank-
as you travel on the road, where would you say the most spiritual place was for yourself, since we're talking a little bit about spirituality in terms of earthing or grounding, and the
Oh,
place that was the least?
the least, yes. Oh, wow. Um, the most spiritual place was definitely the Big Island. Now, we didn't swim there in our little bus. We left the bus on here in the US in Arizona, and we went to Hawaii because it was just a weird kind of calling. Like I had this desire to go to Hawaii for the winter, and it was completely out of the blue and seemed impossible because it's so expensive. And we were looking and looking where we could go, and finally we found this retreat that needed volunteers. And usually places that needed volunteers didn't want any people with kids, and we wanted to travel with our friends, fellow nomads who have 3 little kids, and so we have one teenager. So finally we find this amazing place called Earth Song. It's in the southernmost tip of Big Island, and they needed help. It's a retreat in its very beginning, so they needed help with the gardening and painting and all of that stuff, and they do workshops. So we thought, perfect, we wanted to create something together there, do healing workshops. And so it just all worked out. Like we just managed to actually spend the winter in Hawaii like the rich people do, without being anywhere near that kind of earning bracket. But anyway, what happened there is, how people say that it's a very spiritual place, that it's a very special place. Well, you kind of hear it, but you can't understand what it actually means until you get there. And when
Explain.
you get there, that spirituality of the place, the very, very strong field, or whatever they call their mana, the energy, it literally hits you in your face.
Yeah.
It's like the nature there, it's not just, pretty nature. You come out, you say hi, nature, and then you go back in and you forget about it. It's always present. Like the spirits of nature that Hawaiians believe in, it's almost like you feel they're right next to you all the time. It's the colors of the place, the smells, everything is intense, the wind, the sun, the rain, and it really kind of has this quality of dragging out some issues and darkness out of you,
Yeah.
and really making you face it. uh, it's it's pretty incredible. It was, in a way, it was very intense. It was definitely not a vacation. We were very tired when we came back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because it was just that, you were in constant interaction with that nature there, with these spirits. It was like it constantly wanted to tell you something, and it wanted something back, and you couldn't just be, you know so
Yeah, it's funny. I heard the same story about Hawaii. In fact, I was invited to go there in years past, and people were telling me that the energy is so overwhelming and powerful that you have to be prepared, or at least have the idea of understanding of what its capacity is. The closest thing that I can feel or remember was going to Sedona, in
Hmm.
terms of my experience, was
Yeah.
being in the cathedral, the church in Sedona, is one of the vortexes that have emit a certain type of energy. And going into the church with my girlfriend, and we went in there and we started to cry. It almost felt like a panic attack feeling of my heart
Mm.
racing.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and it was overwhelming, that feeling itself. So I don't know if that was the same experience.
Well, I have been to Sedona as well, and for me, Sedona was quite opposite experience of Hawaii. For me, in Sedona, I experienced it as being very peaceful. And I went to all the vortexes. For me, the most powerful one was the airport mesa,
Yeah,
but the feeling was always for me that of peace. So we met up with some family and friends there, and everything always went very smoothly, peaceful. So Hawaii was like a completely different experience in that regard. And so you see,
yeah,
again, it all depends how we resonate and with what. But
right.
I would say if people are going to Hawaii and want to stay maybe for a longer period of time, they need to pay attention where they're at in their life and what they're looking for, because it seems like that place kind of demands clarity from you.
That's very
That,
interesting.
that's what
Very
I learned.
interesting. That's great insight because many people wouldn't be aware that their environment that they're in could affect their energetic field, which it does. Uh, so since you're writing for travel blogs and for different magazines, uh, and you have to present what is what you like, what are the pros, what are the cons of particular places. You just mentioned something positive. Is there a place that your expectation was higher and it turned to be the opposite?
Um, hmm, the expectation. Well, you know, I thought Florida Keys was a little overrated.
Yeah, I've been
That's
there.
just as a tourist kind of thing. I wouldn't say anything about the spiritual part of it. It's just that it was kind of I imagined it would be more. I guess I imagined the beaches, and I think people oftentimes imagine these spectacular beaches, but it's really not quite about that, even though there are some really interesting places there. And in terms of the least spiritual place, I mean, I think all places have a charge and they have some good places and bad places. I generally would say that ever since we moved out of the city, we are having a hard time being in cities.
Yeah.
So the kind of very high buzzing of anxiety that is present in every city, and that when I lived there, I didn't pay attention to it so much. But now, when we go back into the city, any kind of city, it's very difficult for us to stay for a long time.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, you watch a lot of people who travel, and you almost see the high they get off of being on the road, the experiencing the different energies and the childlike feelings of just being on the go and not really calling home home, but just exploring the earth, which I think everybody should have the opportunity to do. So many
And also
people,
the nature.
yeah, that's what I was going to ask
You
you
have
about.
so much more opportunities to be connected to nature, and when you do that, then you realize, you even wonder how could you live without doing that before, because it's like a necessary um nourishment, I think, for your energetic body to see, to touch the earth and to just feel these kind of frequencies, I guess, that come from it.
The
It's
ground, the grounding, the ability to ground.
grounding. Yeah. The water, I mean, everything in the city. The thing that really struck me in the first few months of traveling, that once we were in any kind of city, I felt like the earth was sealed, under the concrete.
Wow.
And I never thought of it this way, but that really struck me. I was like, oh my God, they sealed the earth. Like, you can't touch it and you can't see it. This is so horrible. Like, how can she breathe? How can we breathe? I don't want to say anything bad about living in the city. Cities can be wonderful. And if you are
Right.
in that place in your life where that's where your energy thrives, that's great. It's just not the case for me anymore.
Yeah, well, I think our energies shift, right? We resonate at different frequencies and vibrations, and depending upon where you live, could either work along with that vibration or be non-productive. So it seems from speaking with you now that you've developed techniques or ways uh, of your own personal growth and actually ways to develop intuition. Maybe you could share a little bit about that of something, since you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, so yeah, there are tools uh right that connect us to our, we can call it higher selves or our guides. Some people call them angels, soul, the universe, whatever you want to call it, but something that is in us and yet is bigger than us, right? And in a way, the tools, you can call them a crutch, because normally we should be able to ask a question and get an answer. I think we can all do that, but for most of us it is difficult because our mind gets on the way and it takes years to train the mind to let it go. Right?
Right, right.
Then we use tools, and i I found my tarot card deck in the street one day. I was walking to work
Wow.
and I was in a kind of a meditative state. I was sitting on the subway listening to some kind of guided meditation, and it really just sort of put me in this blissful state. And I walked out of the subway and I was like, I know there is a gift for me. I'm going to get a gift. What is it going to be? Now, the street that led to my to the place where I was working, it's one of those Brooklyn streets, where you can pick up a couch or a TV for free or something like that. So it wasn't very unusual. I could have gotten a gift there on pretty much any given day, but only on that specific day, I found this deck and it was completely new. And it was just, and the thing is, I love fairies. I've always loved fairies. So it was really cool. There was the fairy tarot cards by Doreen Virtue and Radley Valentine. It's a pretty famous one, but that's how it started. And so for a while, I just did it for myself. And I thought I didn't want to do it for other people because I was afraid to say something wrong,
Right, right, right.
thought it was too much of a responsibility. And then I got this random job of selling crystals on TikTok lives. Don't ask, it's a long story and it's over. But while I was doing it, I would have a live that lasted something like 2 hours. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I mean, I will talk about crystals. I love crystals, but maybe there is something else. So I thought maybe I'll offer tarot readings. It's just for fun. It's strangers. And then I really liked it. There was something about it and people were giving me really good feedback. It seemed like it was really helpful to them. And I thought, wow, that is interesting. So then I decided to go deeper into it and to learn a little bit more about the tool. And I think what's interesting about the tarot, for me, people sometimes think it's like a divination tool, like it will tell you your future or something. I don't personally believe that. I think it's really just a tool for you to connect to the knowledge that you already have somewhere deep within to achieve some kind of clarity. So it can sort of give you a hint about the future, but the future being like many, many possibilities, it's just telling you, okay, where you're at right now and in what direction you're kind of, facing, where you're angling and what to change if you want to change that. So, something like that.
Yeah, what's interesting is most people may recognize or may not recognize the fact that our level of consciousness is, on a different scale, like a different floor of a building. And so each level of consciousness we rise to or sink to puts us on a different timeline in terms of a future possibility.
Oh,
So it's
yes.
very interesting that, the tarot, as you just described, doesn't always predict the future because the future is malleable based upon our present thoughts and the way we think. And
Yeah. And that's what usually I tell people when they ask me a question about the future. I say, it might tell you something, but just know that it's just telling you where you're facing at the moment, like where you are going now. It doesn't mean this can change tomorrow. This can change in an hour, depending on what your thoughts are like and what your beliefs are and what your actions are. So yeah, it's tricky. I don't like when people think of it as a divination tool in that regard. And I also always ask not to ask questions about other people, because I'm a big believer that when we ask about other people, we kind of infringe onto their psychic space, and honestly, it just backfires. It's just not a good idea for us, and it's none of our business. So
yeah, it's excellent because I myself am so interested in the paranormal and different experiences that I've had. Uh, I know that you mentioned to me once before in the past that you had either had a dream or had seen something in terms of a UFO alien,
yeah.
and and you actually wrote a song, which I
Yeah.
love. And if I put it on, people say, "What are you playing?" I said, "I love this song." So
Are
maybe,
you serious? That is
well,
so funny.
I had my own experiences. Last 2 years ago, I was on Long Branch at the beach about 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And you know how people, or sometimes we just look straight ahead of us and we look at the ocean or we look at the sand and we keep our head down. Or we could be doing that when we're walking through the streets. We'd never pick our head up and look up into the sky and see birds or nature. So I picked up my head to the right, and all of a sudden I see a disc right off the shoreline, maybe about 300 feet in the air. And once I looked at it, it slowly shape shifted from like it looked like a silver balloon to a flat disc that went on a 45-degree angle up into the clouds.
Oh, wow.
And I told Tina, I said, "Look," and she saw it. And then in that moment, you're not in any type of position to take a picture because you're so awed and you're transpired by the experience. And so that was that. And then in the wintertime, that winter on the Jersey Turnpike by Newark Airport, wintertime, a blue like Roman candle exploded right over the car, maybe 100 feet above my car.
Oh, wow.
And I felt the connection, uh, either maybe a contact type of thing to be, to pay attention to. And so for me, I'm so inspired by this kind of galactic, universal, you know, potential that lies beyond this realm itself. And then through my work interviewing other people who've had this experience, have you had any type of experience like that?
Well, yeah. So my only experience with specifically UFO was this dream I had when I was little. I must have been very little, like 5. This is why I'm sometimes, distrustful of that experience. I'm like, I don't know, was it a dream? Was it a vision? But in the dream part, I was walking down the corridor with these 2 men who were completely silver skinned, like in my song. Well, the song is of course a joke, but it did happen this way in a dream. They looked like completely regular people. The only thing different about them was that their skin was silver. And then from what I remember waking up and sitting up in my bed and looking towards the closet that was in the room. And it was one of those like polished oak closets, which you couldn't see your reflection in. I mean, it wasn't that polished, but in my memory, I saw those 2 reflected in on the surface of that closet somehow, very
Yeah.
clearly. And like they were sitting on this plank of wood that was hovering or something. At least that's how I interpreted it. So, but to be honest, I was really scared. I remember being very scared. I didn't want to sleep alone for a while after that because it really scared me. And another strange memory I have about it is that the next day I felt very bizarre, like off in some kind of way that I couldn't even explain. So that was,
Yes.
that's sort of my whole memory of the silver
Well,
silver.
I don't negate anybody's experience because from my experience, I think that there is a message in our dreams and there is a message in whatever comes our way, whether it's on this dimension or from other dimensions itself. Somehow or another, I think a lot of people that I interview have had these experiences as a children and been contacted or made contact and were given downloads of information and throughout their lives were followed through and told about certain events that would take place in their lives. So for me, it's an interesting concept. In fact, I had a dream, as you spoke about a dream. I had a dream of a mothership passing by overhead, twice within the month, of like a ship coming in, a woman communicating, speaking to me, and telling me hi, Adam, in a very galactic voice. So when I hear a little bit of your story, and I watch your little song that you sing and the video, which I love, and I'll post that. I'll put that at the bottom, and people who are into this subject will find it fascinating, or at least animated by it. Um, you have an online type of game sessions that helps players get clarity on their lives or their lives paths. Something in line with the tarot. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's actually this kind of transformational gaming is at the moment rather popular, I think, in Russia. I don't know, maybe in other places as well. And so the idea is that usually it's a board game. So in my case as well, it's a board game. And the way it functions is that the player asks a question at the beginning of the game, And then as the player moves through the game, pretty much, moving from space to space and sometimes skipping spaces and sometimes going back, uh, the answer kind of forms itself because every space has a commentary attached to it. And they also move on the board through different spheres of life. So it's really, you can say the concept is very simple. It's really like a simple board game, but it sort of helps you enter into a dialogue, you may say, with the universe or with yourself, and gain clarity that will either come to you through these commentaries that you read, or even just as you're playing, thoughts and feelings emerge, and the game, it's interesting, it doesn't let you out until you figure something out. So it can be it can be even frustrating.
Yeah, so I guess it's surrendering to your ego, so to speak, I guess, through play.
Yes, that is a great actually way to put it. Yeah. So at the moment, I invite people to play online, and I lead the session. But the idea eventually is to have a physical game set, so that people could actually play on their own.
That's it. Very interesting. As we discuss these particular topics, where are you headed next, and what do you see yourself doing in the future along with the work you're doing? Anything different, or just build upon it?
Right. So at the moment, we feel like there is some kind of transition in the air. We feel like something has to change in terms of our living situation. Our bus is becoming very small for the three of us. So we are open to some kind of change and looking into that. In terms of, for me, I also I love writing stories and fairy tales, and that's what I've been also doing. And I've been writing a fantasy novel, so I'm really into that right now, creating alternative worlds and universes, and telling stories that are exciting but do not have any violence in it. I'm really kind of against creating violent imagery, and I feel like right now, we watch so many exciting shows on TV and read books, and a lot of it relies on violence to give us that kind of, something.
Yeah.
And I feel like right now a new era is coming, and we need to go into this new place where artists don't need to be depressed to create, where our creation doesn't have to be driven by darkness to be exciting, where violence doesn't have to be the only thing that, propels our imagination and that really puts us in the state of like, oh my God, I want to know what's next.
Absolutely.
So this is kind of a thing where I'm heading, what I'm writing. I hope I'm making something that is still adventurous and exciting, but finding a way for it to still have very positive messaging and not put any kind of anxiety producing images into people's heads.
Yeah. If somebody were interested in reaching out to you in terms of for a tarot reading or in contacting you, where could they do that?
They can go to my website, www.irinaweavesmagic.com. Simple.
Okay. You have almost as long a name as I do for my website, which is, my friends make fun of me.
It's long, but it's also clear. It's Irina Weaves Magic,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if anybody if you could leave the audience with like one message on life, what you've experienced to this point, what would you say?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Um, I think don't be hard on yourself and flow with everything that you're feeling. We are not perfect, and we'll probably are not going to be in this lifetime, and that's okay. So if you have something nice and kind to do it for yourself. And then, of course, extend it to other people. But don't forget to be nice to yourself. Yeah.
Okay. On that note, I'd like to thank you for joining me today and sharing this inspirational journey that you've been on with your family, and the inspirational person that you are on an individual basis as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
You're welcome, Irina. Thank you. No.